I'm delighted to welcome you to the Carter. My name is Brett Abbott. I'm the Director of Collections and Exhibitions. And we have a great program for you tonight. I'm delighted to be introducing our speaker, Ellen Carey. Before I say nice things about Ellen, I want to say a big thank you to all of the members who are with us tonight and all of the supporters of the museum. Your support is really meaningful, and it helps us to keep programs like this one and activities around the museum free to all around the year. So it's really meaningful, and thank you. Some of you may be familiar with Ellen Carey's work. She has a monumental print on view in our galleries right now, gracing the Polaroid exhibition. Let me tell you a little bit about her background. She's an educator, a scholar, a curator, and a lens-based artist. She's been dedicating herself to the creation of unique and experimental work for more than 40 years. As an artist who was associated with the Polaroid Artists Support Program, she worked in innovative ways to create minimal and abstract compositions at the Polaroid 20 by 24 studio, often harnessing light itself as her subject. And this is something that she has carried over to her cameraless photographs as well, that we'll learn a little bit about tonight. Her work is bold, it's innovative, and it's powerful in a very visceral way for those who stand in front of it, as you may have already experienced in our galleries. Her work has been the subject of 53 one-person exhibitions, hundreds of group exhibitions, and prints from her long and dedicated career are in the permanent collections of over 20 museums, including the George Eastman House, the Fogg Museum at Harvard, Yale University Art Gallery, the Met, the Smithsonian, and the Whitney, among many others. So needless to say, we are very honored to have her with us tonight. Please take a moment to silence your phones if you have not done that already. Thank you. I see some of you moving towards them. And more importantly, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Ellen Carey to the stage.
Wow, that's a lot of years of working, isn't it? The 20th century into the 21st. I'm so happy to be here tonight. It is an honor to be involved with the Polaroid Project and the vision of Dr. Edwin Land. There's a lot of people to thank, and I think it would take more than the 60 seconds that it took me to develop my Polaroid work. So I just want to let everybody at the museum know this installation is stellar. The book is fantastic. There's a lot of people in the background who work very hard on this. Actually, it was 8 years ago that Barbara Hitchcock and Bill Ewing approached me about doing the show. So it's a really labor of love, and very happy, and thank the Amy Carter. It's a very special and dear project to my heart. So let us begin. The trajectory of my slide talk tonight is in the context of museums. So it's Back to the Future, the Avant-Garde is an address, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the context of photography vis-a-vis the avant-garde and the museum's place in it, which will begin right here. So Marcel Duchamp, the ready-made, was photographed by Alfred Stieglitz, and many of you may or may not know that he started Gallery 291. He was married to George O'Keeffe, and he also exhibited many people from Paris. Certainly before the war, Paris was the art center of the world. We have Picasso, Dada, Surrealism, Man Ray, etc. This idea of photographing the object is also kind of a forerunner for appropriation and the ready-made, and begins this. It's hard to believe that when I moved to New York City in 1979, there were only 2 photo galleries. In this context, I was born in New York, Atlanta, Chicago. I went to school in Kansas City Art Institute in the early 70s and did my graduate work in Buffalo. Buffalo as we see here, was the first museum to exhibit photography in connection with Alfred Stieglitz and the photo successionists. And that begins our avant-garde vis-a-vis museums forefronting and showcasing. When I was in graduate school, we had the Cindy Sherman, who our beloved American photographer, and we had a group of artists, and we started with, I did these pen light photograms. Again, we're underscoring with light. And people often ask me, where did I first show my pictures? And I said, on a bus in Buffalo. And everybody goes, oh, come on, Ellen, really? And I'd say, oh, no, we really did. It's interesting. So Cindy is on my right, and her pictures of the bus, she dressed up in different people who took the buses in blackface. And I know it's hard to believe, but there was really no place for us to exhibit. I was doing my graduate work at SUNY Buffalo, which was Governor Rockefeller used a lot of money to make that the flagship school. We had filmmaking, avant-garde filmmaking with Paul Scherritz, Hollis Frampton, poetry with Robert Creeley. So there's a context for the avant-garde, much like there was in Paris. And this is a portrait of my mother, but as you can see, light was the indexical. Photography is light hitting light-sensitive paper, and here that is echoed in this image of a portrait of her, where I'm using light to reflect and highlight the pupil of her eye, but also echoes the aperture or the opening of the lens. In Western New York begins with Linda Cathcart. In effect, it was maybe predates the Whitney Biennial or is concurrent with that, and highlighted contemporary artists in a museum setting. And here is one of my first and earliest images using the Polaroid camera. The super shooter was a one-step peel-away process. Here's the instant color, My Sparkling Self, 1977. Again, moving towards experimentation, reworking the surface, and again, this idea of self-portraiture. The history of photography begins in 1834 in England with William Henry Fox Talbot. He is the inventor of the paper photography, the negative to the positive image, which you can see is echoed in Polaroid, is also forefronted and underscored in my work. And color, which is Anna Atkins, the first woman practitioner, the first in color, predates Talbot's photo book. And I'm also saying she's a precursor to minimal and abstract art, which is in my scholarship, which we'll get to in a minute. This is another early piece, a prototype of where I went to a wig store and put on wigs and see what I look like with different images. And it was supposed to be life-size. This, again, gender studies, gender identity, which is very much part of our culture today, was being explored. What is the self? And thinking about particularly this idea of fantasy. There's a very famous Hippolyte Bayard self-portrait as the drowned man, which, you begin to enter this idea of makeup and dress up and allowing yourself to be presented something else. Polaroid SX70, 1975, again, adding paint. The great invention of Dr. Edward Land, which we see in the exhibition upstairs. My thesis show at Hall Walls, which was an artist-run space, were these painted self-portraits. And I was a litho major and photography major, wearing black, so echoing this idea of the negative and reversing the ground is something we can see crops up in my work, and of course gray, echoing the gray card and the tonal values in black and white photography. This is an exhibition a few years ago, again, revisiting this idea of Buffalo and the avant-garde from the 1970s. It was curated by Heather Pizzanti, who is now in Austin, Texas. And she had, the catalog was, according to music, poetry, film, the visual arts, and it also highlighted Hall Walls Gallery, SEPA, the Birchfield Penny Center, and of course the Albright Knox, and the whole sort of constellation of artists and practitioners. In the late 70s, I received a Creative Artist Program Service grant of $5,000, and I sold some work, and I went to New York City. I settled in Little Italy, later getting a studio in Soho, and I first showed at PS1. Again, another alternative space, just starting to exhibit artists. Now it's PS1 MoMA, and the show that was exhibited with my painted self-portraits were, again, experimental, and was called The Altered Image. And it had people like Sam Wagstaff, Mary Boone, Weston Neff, who was the curator of photography and drawings and prints at the Met. And that self-portrait work that was manipulated was followed up with large figurative work and overpainting. So in the context of the 80s, there was a kind of umbrella stylistic where it was called pluralism, and people, it was sort of an anything goes. We had Julian Schnabel cracking and broken plates and putting on canvas. We had Judy Pfaff going down to Canal Street and picking up Dayglow plexi forms and doing installation. So the size and scale becomes very important in my work at this point, and to kind of reference Robert Smithson, size could be a crack in the wall or the Grand Canyon. I returned to the self around 1983 and reversing the positive to the negative. This again begins an interest in the shadow image and the reference to Talbot, and then adding color. In 1983, I was introduced to the Polaroid support program, which I started using the camera in 1984. This is, again, a kinship. I think it's fair to say that Polaroid is the only corporation that fully began supporting artists early on. So Dr. Edwin Land went to Ansel Adams and later Marie Cassendas, who just passed away last May at the age of 92, to develop color. So they had this program where you could go in and shoot with the camera, the big 2024, circa 1980s, and it's a custom-made Deerdorf camera. John Ruder will be here in a few weeks. He's the director of the Polaroid 2024. He reminded me that I had to go up to Boston to do my early shooting. It was housed at the School for the Museum of Fine Arts, and they also had the 4080 camera there. At this time, I was re-evaluating my work, which is what artists do, I do anyway, and thinking about the overpainting as a inroad to a kind of internal state. And I also realized at this point the Polaroid materials were outstanding. The reds, the dyes have a particular brilliance all their own, a soft edge brilliance. The contact print, there was no grain, and it was a one-step peel-away process. So I went back and started doing these, for lack of a better word, in the early 1984 to 87, these kind of Neo-Geo wraparound. Now you have to, again, understand New York City in the context of the 80s, which is being relooked at today. I did have a show at ICP in 1987 in their New Directions series. It was curated by Willis Hartshorn, who went on to be the director. He's recently retired. So this idea of Polaroid supporting artists, supporting innovation, giving you film and cameras, and really took hold. It was really a game changer in my life. And these 1984, these early Neo Geos. So basically, I'm painting with light. This work was recently the subject of a group show at the Pompidou called The Unbearable Lightness, referencing Milan Kundera's The Unbearable Lightness, being photography and film from the 1980s. So the 1980s in New York City, that was the art capital of the world. It was also on the verge of bankruptcy. It was a real nitty-gritty. We had Jean-Michel Basquiat. It was a zeitgeist, avant-garde, and the museums responded, and the alternative spaces responded. So I worked on the camera, pretty much leaving. I was doing some black and white film work in the background, at this time, I got a appointment at the Hartford Art School and was reverse commuting from Soho, Little Italy. My apartment was the tenement Tiny at Little Italy, and Spring and Lafayette, and my studio was at Spring and Mercer, across the street from Donald Judd, and then I would go up to Hartford. I did live in New Mexico for 6 months, and at that time, I met the astrologer who discovered Pluto. And at that time, he told me that mathematics and science and nature had kinships with art, and it was the same DNA. And if you think about, I think it was Einstein said, art and nature, art and science are branches of the same tree. And one of my jobs in New York City, amongst many, the struggling artist, we don't have to go into that, but you can use your imagination if you want, waitress, everything. So I did picture research at Mademoiselle, so I started doing picture research onto these structures, like the DNA, the golden mean, and I began to realize through these books that there were visual structures, the circle and the square, and they are the governing structures of all things since the beginning of time, whether it's the solar system or the Parthenon. So I began to make collages, these overpaintings, and this is the golden mean on the top and bottom, left and right. I also began to do a much more earnest study of color theory, which I had learned Joseph Albers, of course, as all art students do. And here is an excellent example. I think what maybe separates me a little bit from the other Polaroid artists is the way I use color in my work. So you have photographic color theory. Color is an artist's universe, and photographic color theory is photography's planet. And it's through light, and we have red, green, and blue are the primary additives, and yellow, magenta, cyan are the primary subtractives. And here you see the light mixing, actually, the red and the green making the yellow, the blue and the red making the magenta. It's a little bit harder to see here with the blue and the green making the cyan. Again, a very different departure for photography and self-portraiture. So I'm referencing science and technology, maybe a little bit more akin to Laurie Anderson at the time, who was the avant-garde experimental. So the Polaroid program was alive very vital from 1984 to about 1987. So Black Monday happened in 1987. It was, I think, October 10th, and everything pretty much shut down in Lower East Side, Soho, Wall Street. A very short, complicated is that Polaroid was suing Kodak for stealing their copyright from the SX70 camera because they had done the color burst, and then Walt Disney wanted to buy Kodak and not pay Polaroid. It's a big movie. It's a big movie. John Rutter is going to write the story. However, pretty much all of the art world cleared out at that time. And I began thinking about this idea of what makes an abstract photograph. And that begins here with this picture. Let me just grab a little water. Also, I began to read about David Hockney, the one-eyed Cyclops, and photography. And thinking about off-frame space. David Hockney writes wonderful essays around photography. Excuse me. This is 1995, and here we have a photogram that I made, and I took it to the Polaroid studio. And this begins my investigation into abstraction. So this piece embodies photographic color theory. So where you have the red and the green overlap make yellow, the blue and the red are magenta, and we have yellow mixing with the red and the green. It also references chaos and order, symmetry and asymmetry, Marcel Duchamp's rotary, which is the spinning, and some other laws of physics. For example, the center stays still. So here I'm beginning to think about, what is an abstract photograph? What is experimental photography vis-a-vis the history of the medium? In 1995, my mother was diagnosed with a terminal illness with 40 to 70 weeks to live. And my middle brother was an AIDS doctor, and he had an accident and cracked his skull 6 months before my mother. So I went to the Polaroid studio. I was bereft and grief-stricken, and I really didn't know how to express myself. And I did this series called Family Portraits, which we'll look in a minute. And this is my first pull in 1996. And I realized that what's so great about photography is its camera vision. It captures things out there. It records reality, landscapes, portraits, still lifes. But the internal feelings of my mourning period were not being able to express through my medium. And this pull represented the absence of the picture side, what we call in photography. There's no subject matter. It was just the left rectangle and this long conical loop, which is called a parabola, again referencing the cone family. And then the panel on the right is all black. And I realized that's sort of like how I was feeling, that there was no film or anything to express this internal state, which led to a kind of breakthrough in my visual thinking. And here you have, this is called the pull and rollback, red, green, and blue. Again, the primary additives in color photography. I was also, materials have meaning, the economy of means. So the Polaroid film is the white receiving paper, which you see here, is not light sensitive. And when I'm borrowing terms from traditional photography, like the double exposure and rolling it back up and pulling it through and letting the negatives dry. Here you see, I think this is circa 2004 or so. I'm at the Polaroid studio, this sort of panoramic of me pulling up the negative from its positive. Some of the chemistry I'm approaching making the pictures through innovation and different art making techniques and ideas that I come up with. And often that includes mixing the Polaroid pods. So at the top of the rectangle, you see a black bar, and those are called Polaroid tulips. So those are kind of a signature. And the area that's the rectangle is the exposed area. And then the black conical loop is my contribution to the medium, this parabola shape, the conical loop. And it's the first time this shape has been introduced. So it is echoed in the tip of a comet or a silhouette of a pine cone. And often I have to wear, in this particular case, I'm mixing different pods that go together. So we have P3, P6, P7. Sometimes working with the black and white pods. The pods are the envelopes that hold the dyes, and I'm mixing pods that go through it. Very unorthodox. So apparently there's a tussle that I'm just beginning to learn about in Europe, where there's this tussle between representation and abstraction. But I'm using very non-traditional approaches and looking at the apparatus of the thing itself. But the guiding concept, the umbrella concept, always has to be light. So this is an installation that was at Real Artways. Again, an alternative space. It's probably 10,000 square feet. It's where I have my studio now. It's the old Underwood typewriter factory. And this was Morning Wall, family portrait, and birthday portrait. This is the Morning Wall. It's 100 negatives, going from 0 to 20, 21 to 40, all the way up. It's about 45 feet wide and 15 feet high. So it was a kind of homage to the mourning period. I had done a lot of research on trying to find artworks that were about mourning, and I couldn't really find anything. So I decided to make one myself. This was done in October 2000, and it predates 9/11 by 1 year. The individual gray negatives, gray, of course, is the color for mourning. And what happened was I shot it in August, installed it. It was designed to go through from the 20th century to the 21st century and to be a document of the last 100 years, which included, of course, 2 world wars, global pandemics, accidents, natural disasters. But what was interesting is the silver salts, I knew the negatives were going to change and oxidize over time, and they did indeed. The silver salts oxidized and the excess water evaporated. And in effect, the mourning wall, when it started to dry, it was almost like a prayer shawl it left, and it was also like it was crying. So the tears. It got quite a bit of press. It's on my website, etc. The middle room is the one that predates the pull. It's the same day. And I went to go to the Polaroid studio doing a portrait of my family, which of course photography uses the camera to record family snapshots and special events and birthdays and celebration. And in my particular case, I thought I would do a symbolic, more minimal monochrome of my family. So my father died 2 weeks before I moved to New York in 1979. The first 2 panels are my parents. My older brother, the 2 white, the one middle for my brother, and the 2 for my younger siblings. I shot it in color. So you have the kind of ink black and the white. And people often compare my work to minimal and abstract artists. But I liken photography as a universal language, and this predates the iPhone, of course. And I think of piano keys and the black and the onyx, black and the white ivory, which brought back a memory of my grandparents and their piano. Now, what was so interesting about this day was the negatives, whether they were exposed to light in the white or black, the negatives look the same. So you have this exact, there was no difference, which John and I did not expect, and nor did John. And here is the positives all lined up. And then you have the matte black. So I realized that I was reading this book by Louise Kaplan, No Voices Wholly Lost. And then I also started reading, I grew up Catholic, so kind of lapsed, but you know, whatever, Catholics do. Lapsed or not, we still have it with us, right? I started reading the Tibetan book of Living and Dying. So they talk about the rainbow body, which I'll talk about later, but also Freud's the uncanny. So at the time when I realized the negatives and the positive were radically different, and this was the matte black was like an open burial pit, referencing the ground in which you go on. I had so what Freud calls the uncanny, like you have this weird experience. I don't know how many people have it's like Freud the uncanny, sort of like serendipity and synchronicity and deja vu, things you can't really explain. So this middle room at Real Artways, and that is the family portrait, like tombstones, and that predates the Mourning Wall. That was in 1998. Polaroid started to develop this black and white film that was colorless, and that was made in 1999. So in my research on the history of photography, my budding scholarship, I took museum studies at the Albright Knox and lots of art history. Again, I cannot emphasize the importance of museums to look at art and do research. The history of photography begins with Talbot, with the negative image that's later contact printed to make the positive. But there is a Greek fable told by the Roman philosopher Pliny the Elder, Pliny, and it's lovers parting to war, and the beloved woman traces her lover on the wall, making the outline, which then becomes the shadow image, and anticipation of loss in death is the origins of the creation of art. So I wrote my own wall labels. What's so interesting about that myth fable is that it is made by photographers. And I can't remember if it's Helen Adamson. There is a dealer in New York City named Hans Kraus who only deals in Talbot and Anna Atkins. So it's quite a, this idea of creativity, where does it come from? This is called Birthday Portrait, and by destiny or fate, coincidence, both my parents died the day before their birthday, and my brother about a month after his. So I had a great childhood and all kinds of fabulous things. The adulthood was a little more of a struggle, but I thought I would celebrate that, and I did pulls and rollbacks. So the first panel is called Family Portrait, and this one's called Birthday Portrait, and it's sort of everything that I learned up to that date. So we have blue gender-coded. I was not gender-coded as a child, and didn't even know that existed until I went to Kansas City Art Institute, but there you have it. And I coded off of blue for boys, pink for girls. The left panel is my father, March Oxblood, using the sort of hallmark codes of birthstones, diamond for my mother, and ruby for my brother. So this has a lot of patina on it. It's quite messy, but it's also like birthday candles melting. So there's a lot of new forms, and experimenting. Stopping Down is a self-portrait series I did in 2001. And interestingly enough, I was in 9/11 in Washington, D.C. I just got a sabbatical, and I was going down to look at a lot of Talbots. So this is before 9/11, by coincidence, several months. And this is done by the Polaroid 8x10, and this idea of aging, stopping down, so from F9 to 128, going towards aging, the shadow image. Again, the silhouette is a powerful, there's a great book called The Short History of the Shadow in Art that has a chapter on the shadows. So this idea that the silhouette, the shadow, the outline, very powerful metaphors in philosophy, religion, you name it, it's there. So RGB, yellow, magenta, cyan. This is another piece. It's the half the size of the Polaroid, the installation of the Morning Wall. This is called Self-Portrait at 48, and I cued off a clock. So it goes from right is 3 o'clock, or go to the top. It was noon, midnight, 9 o'clock, 6 o'clock, and 3 o'clock. So that when you travel around, you notice that there are these empty rectangles, and that's my year of mourning. So when my father died, and then later when my brother and mother died. So it's actually 50. I was approaching my 50th birthday, but there's 48 self-portraits echoing the silhouette and the clock. The ponytail is very much a girl, intentionally female, and then the silhouettes are very totemic and sculptural. Well, I have this I had a rule. I think it started out in undergrad school. Of course, I was in New York City, would go to museums, went to the Art Students League as a young artist. But I don't know if I was conscious of it at the time, but I always was around great museums. So we have the Nelson Atkins, we have the Wadsworth Atheneum, the first public art museum in America, and they have a program called Matrix. And the Matrix program was bringing avant-garde artists. It's quite a list of people who would do exhibition in a traditional museum setting. So you're kind of selected, and it's an outstanding list. You can go to their website. It's pretty much gender 50-50, race, etc., subject matter. And it's a very prestigious, it's sort of like you got an Oscar, and you didn't have to compete with anybody. They call you up and they say, you want to be a Matrix artist? And you say, sure, why not? It's like saying, oh, you just got an Oscar. So it's really fantastic. And they said, okay, Ellen, what do you want to do? And I said, well, they got this Polaroid 4080 camera. I'd really like to work on that because they said, okay, you're in. So we kept photography degree 0, which references Roland Barthes's book, Writing Degree 0, from 1953. And that he talks about the French avant-garde, Jean-Paul Sartre, being in nothingness, this idea that there is no narrative, there's no beginning, middle, and end. And in my work, Photography Degree 0 talks about that. And by coincidence, we have the 0 camera, the Polaroid camera. So normally the matrix are down in the main floor. They decided to do mine upstairs in the Morgan. And then they only had 5 pieces in the very monochrome palette. And that's this group here. This is the gallery, which was, I think, 50 feet high and some 50 feet. So I went to New York City on this very, very hot day, and I shot the 4080s with John Reuter and Jennifer Trausch and a couple other people. And there's one missing here. So we go from black to red. So it's like a cascade or columns, and then the opposite wall were the negatives. So this is 44 inches high by about 10 or 12 to 15 feet high. So the Polaroid 4080 is right from the manufacturer. Then it's cut in half for the 2024, cut further for 8x10 and 4x5. And this is Ben Lifson wrote a wonderful essay, which is also on my website. The late scholar, art historian Ben Lifson. This idea of abstraction, I think, is a tough one, is a kind of contradiction and a paradox in photography, because we look to photography to capture reality and document that and describe it and help us, which the iPhone is incredible. I had a hunch everybody was visual photographically, but now I know it for sure. So I was struggling. I went back and started looking at photograms from Talbot to Anna Atkins all the way up through Moholy-Nagy, Man Ray, contemporary practices. And one of my, I sort of have guideposts called what I call the 4 C's. The concept always includes light, content, might be photographic, color theory, RGB, yellow, content follows by context. Normally the shadow has to be included, but how do I make that happen in a picture? And I use push pins to, when I'm shooting at the Polaroid studio, we use push pins to sort of let the images, the big pulse, dry overnight. And I sort of interrupt the traditional methods of making things. So I decided to puncture and do push pins. And here you see a sort of record of, in a way, sort of symbolically and metaphorically going from representation to abstraction. And this is in 2002. The blinks, everyone was getting excited about digital. I'm not digitally native, in case you haven't noticed. But I did do these photograms called blinks, and I could only make them 16 by 20, so then I blew them up. This idea of the biology of seeing was also a point of interest, and you see it in Pierre Mondrian's Boogie Woogie painting, for example. Went back into the Polaroid using the pen light, which you saw in my earlier work, and basically tinted, and this idea of abstraction and drawing with light is echoed in this diptych here. This idea of color became more and more forefronted in my research and mixing the pods. So every time there was a change in Polaroid, I responded, and this is an artwork from that response. So basically, instead of the pod, which is the size of an envelope, they were breaking in transit, so they had to seal those at thirds and give you 2 pods to put together to make exposure. So for Chuck Close or Wegman, if they were broken, they couldn't use them. So they called me up and they said, "Hey, Ellen, we got some broken pods. You want to play with those?" I'm like, "Yes, I do." "We'll give you a big discount." I'm like, "I'm in. Don't worry, you know." Dings and shadows. Again, breaking with taboo, traditional forms of making work, sort of rearranging the hierarchy of photography. So in this particular case, I'm being sensitive to the materials of the paper. These are 30 by 40. Unbeknownst to me and the rest of the world, Kodak was going towards bankruptcy, which none of us knew about. So I only made 3 sets like this. So RGB, again, photographic color theory, the blue is really a violet royal blue, and then yellow, magenta, cyan. So the ding is taboo. In my field, any of you photographers out there, you know, if you make a print, you have a ding in there, that's it, right? You're out. So, and that kind of means like, you don't know what you're doing. So I take these traditions, these sort of taboos, and break those boundaries and sort of use the materials. Materials have meaning in art and the economy of means, and always has to do with light and the ding and the shadow, of course, the shadow image. And for those of you who don't know this, how many people print color? Anybody? 1 person, 2 people, 3 people. Okay, so what do you do in the color darkroom? You know, there's no light at all allowed in color. So it's a very different experience than the amber darkroom experience where you're working in amber light. It's light sensitive, but in color, there is absolutely no light at all. So it's the black box, very existential again. So I love all those kind of, you know, being in nothingness, like you're there in this sort of, you have to sort of use your rest of your senses. And for me, pulling out these big sheets of paper, large printing is demanding in many ways, different than black and white. And of course, no light at all except upon exposure. So in a way, it's a record of my performance and my experimentation, a different record than we normally see. So my independent scholar part of my life is I always wrote about my work. So photography degree 0 is the umbrella concept for my Polaroid pulls. Struck by light is my photograms. The beloved late Saul LeWitt was born in Hartford and lived down the road, and I was very fortunate to meet him and become friendly with him. And this is his last installation. That was it, called Whirls and Twirls at the Wadsworth Athenaeum in the Morgan Hall. So I was amazed at his boldness with color. And if you ever get a chance to go to Mass MoCA, it's an extraordinary experience. It's 3 floors. Each floor is 9,000 square feet, 27 there. And as he's he's just bolder with the color. And this idea of the rainbow comes into play here. I have a lot of interest in color vis-a-vis the rainbow. And when he passed away, his wife Carol and the family asked me if I would write something. So this begins, Color Me Real is the name of my essay. I can't get past 750 words, so everybody who's writing more than that and PhDs, I'm newfound appreciation. But that begins that. I was struggling, artists struggle. That part you never see, really. I think you hear about it a little bit, but I was struggling with these pen light drawings and these abstractions what led to the dings and shadows. And while I was visiting the Smithsonian, my friend Mary Frost is a Man Ray, I was saying, you know, what's wrong with my picture? You know, I don't know. Ooh, and she said, well, you know, you need to look at this Man Ray space writing here, right, Ellen? So let's go to dinner. I said, no, there's his name in there. I had this intuitive flash. Man Ray is one of my favorite artists, and you can see probably the influence of surrealism, Dada, automatic drawing, moving into abstract expressionism. Of course, I had the good fortune of doing museum studies at the Albright Knox. I'm looking at those great Motherwell and Pollock, etc., and Helen Frankenthaler and everybody. And then I noticed this writing. This is the image as it is reproduced in many books. That's the reversal. And of course, photography has the apparatus of the mirror, you know. And here is his name, Man Ray. Now, everybody missed this for a long time, since 1935. What's so interesting is that Man Ray, unbeknownst to me when I made this discovery, also had his first one-person show of his photography at the Wadsworth Athenaeum. This picture was not in there, but I have an essay on this, and I started doing research because everyone talks about Jackson Pollock, like how did he get there? And there's a great book called Tom and Jack, The Intertwining Lives of Thomas Hart Benton and Jackson Pollock, written by Dr. Henry Adams, and he became my new friend through this discovery because he thinks Pollock's hidden signature is in the mural painting. But, you know, I said, now wait a second. This is a link to Pollock. So this is an unacknowledged historical link. And I talked to Francis V. O'Connor, who's the Pollock scholar, and he said, Ellen, you're right. Like, how come nobody noticed this? Because everybody's wondering, like, how do you go from World War II, you're in Paris, Dada, Surrealism, and then everybody comes to New York, and there's Pollock and de Kooning and Lee Krasner and Joan Mitchell, you know, like, its line is open for him. And so I sent it off to several Man Ray scholars, and I'm also doing research on this, and he was Jewish. His name was Emanuel Radzinski, and the Kabbalah starts with the Book of Zohar and begins in reverse. The creator started with the alphabet backwards. Then there is another link to photography through Talbot and Lord Byron, where Lord Byron wrote on a piece of, we don't know what it was, clear something, vellum, and then he contact printed it. It's in reverse. And Leonardo da Vinci wrote it into reverse. And the mirror apparatus is reverse. So this idea of mirroring and doubling and powerful. So I had a lot of fun with that one. Again, can't get past, I think that's 550 words. Struggle, I had footnotes, I had to send it out to somebody. I'm like getting a headache, like how do these people write all this? But the pull and the rollback, which is in the book. So again, experimenting with process by, you know, intervention and moving things around. This is in the book and in the traveling or in the book, but not in the traveling exhibition. So, and this is a suite of dings and shadows. So they're 40 inches high by 30 inches wide. This is a project that I did in response to 2015, the Paris attacks. Like I said, I was in 9/11 in Washington, D.C. that fateful day, and I took the train up through New York a few days later, and I noticed that the sky looked like the morning wall, and, you know, it was Christmas, I couldn't really think, you know, I thought about losing my family and the first Christmas and how tough that is. So I did this piece. I work with an architect. We did a maquette of the Paris attacks and Charlie Hebdo and the nightclub, and then I think it's about 142 people that were lost that fall. And then I made this piece, which is very big. It's about 12 feet high. And then it reminded me of the halo, the nimbus, the robes. And then I began to look at the, you know, Jesus and the Shroud of Turin, which is really the first photograph, they're saying, the first negative. And, right? Catholic. So a lot of people, you know, got to work it, right? So, and then, you know, people want to know where my color came from. So Musée magazine just did it. Where does your color come from? Well, you know, you're Catholic, you look out stained glass windows a lot. So I was thinking about this as the robe and the monks, and so this is life size. So eventually, one day, would like to do a whole installation of this. So that is, again, here's a newer piece. The Polaroid cameras is live and well. We're still working. We're not going away. I'm sorry. Can't give up my materials. Materials have meaning for artists. So I'm not giving it up. That's it. I'm not giving up my color printing. It's all, you know, get to a certain level of skill sets and like, why bother to change, right? So, and thank you so much, the Abel Carter Museum of America. You've been exhibiting photography for 55 years, since 1962, and I might be wrong because John Rohrbeck told me today it was 1961. So the intersection of art and technology also is forefronted by museums, and certainly this is a great one. And thank you all for coming to my talk. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to take them. Thank you. So I think we have, let's see, we're good. We're good. So any questions? How I survived the blizzard of 1977 in Buffalo? Chicken wings were really good. Yeah.
First of all, apologize for coming in late.
Oh, that's okay.
And you may have covered this, but in the process, are you actually using a camera for exposure of your negative, or are you doing it in the darkroom, or
For the Polaroids?
for these? Yes.
This is shot in a studio. See, that's a good question, because all the other work is camera-based, film-based. But it's an interesting conundrum, because the Polaroid work is shot. I mean, people can watch me work, and this is not a darkroom. This is the big camera. You can go online to www.20x2024studio.com. It's a custom-built camera. There are 5 in the world. I think it's world famous, right? More than Lady Gaga. Any person I talk to, they say, "Oh, the camera." I was like, "Well, So it's roll film. So the negative comes down, so it faces out towards the studio. In effect, I'm not really photographing. I'm just doing light, exposure, no exposure, zero again, and then it drops down between. John Wooder is working on a film called Camera Ready. It drops down between 2 rollers, and the pod breaks and squeegees across in between the negative and the positive, and comes out.
So who's making the pods now?
He is. We're not going to leave it. We're very tough. When they said they were going to close, I think there was Impossible Mission started. It was this whole global, thank goodness for the social media, because, it was a rocky road. I mean, 85% of the global market before the market crash in 87 was owned by Kodak. So you had 15% owned by, and I'm sure these numbers are, maybe not super accurate, but they're close enough if you look at the pie. And then I think 3% was Polaroid, and then there was Fuji and Ilford and Agfa. So it's expensive, but you know what? What are you going to do? You have your materials. Materials have meaning, and I just wasn't going to give it up. I looked at Cibachrome. I didn't like the grain.
I don't think you could achieve anything like this
Yeah.
with that process.
It was a breakthrough. I think now people see it as it's a breakthrough. It's sort of like when you look at the art movements of Impressionism and Post-Impression and Dada, Surrealism. I mean, I inherited all those great. I'm a product of the 20th century. My parents were both feminists. They said I could do whatever I wanted to do, be well educated. So when I went to art school in 1971, I wanted to be a fine artist. Like, people didn't know what that was, sort of like, oh, they'd step away, so. And art schools like today, where we're building digital labs, were the place to go. So we had, we just started Society for Photographic Education, College Art Association. So the world of possibilities, if you study, history is a wonderful teacher and resource, and you study Dada and Surrealism and Man Ray and all those wonderful automatic drawing, and then that was huge avant-garde, tremendous artworks. And then the art world moves post-World War II to New York City, so you have Pollock and, all the great abstract expressionism and Rothko and, Lee Krasner and Joan Mitchell. And when you realize that's what I inherited. I'm an American artist, and I'm quite proud of it, actually. I'm a Polaroid artist, because all those, feminism and the Beatles and Vietnam and all that, freedom. So I grew up being free, and I want the photographs to be free too. And I think after I lost my father, I didn't really have a chance to mourn him. It was very quick. And then when my brother and mother died, I went into this morning, and I gave all my cameras away. It just didn't seem, that was able to express the depth and scope and internal, symbolic, metaphoric. And the Polaroid did, and the photograms did. The darkroom is a different experience. So I have two practices, the Polaroid, which is outside in the light in the studio, and the color. So I've become more focused on color since 2000. And that also starts another project on Anna Atkins that I'm working on. She's the first woman in color, and it turns out, briefly stated, that some women carry a gene called technochromacy, and they can discern color better than men. And men have a higher rate, 20 to 30% higher rate of color blindness. So I have a hunch. I mean, I kind of work on my intuition vis-a-vis Man Ray, and so.
Are the negatives permanent or they degrade over time?
Well, I don't know why photography is the repository for permanence. I would say sculpture's better there, but I don't know. That piece is 1997 upstairs. I haven't seen it since I made it. It looks good. I took museum studies. I handle the works very, they're looking good. They do change. The negatives,
Even if they're stabilized, once you peel it apart,
well, I don't know. We don't know. I went and looked at 400 Talbots. It was a fascinating experience. Here's this man. There were 3 people working in photography: Daguerre, Talbot, and Anne Atkins. I wanted to cry. They were so beautiful. Their pictures are gone, but the chemistry that he was coating the paper with was very active, to the point where Larry Schaff, who was looking at not that many people could look at these because they were, I don't know, so light sensitive, but there was a little tiny, little piece of this tab that was there, and he had them in between these plastic sheets, and the little tab went down onto this light-sensitive chemical area. It made a little photogram. Those chemicals are alive, and very happily alive. So now the image inside this picture was the ghost image. It was a white rectangle. Or maybe it was a square, but it was a statue. It had gone, but you had the remnants of this, and his signature was always the same. So, the artist struggle is something that interests me, how artists, and that's sort of the backstory, we all struggle with our materials. So, yeah, I mean, that's why the Talbots they're, I don't know how much they are now. Millions of dollars, is my guess. I mean, you're getting the best of the best of me here, people. We don't show anything but the very, very best.
We've got time for one more question.
Yep. Anybody else? Yes.
So obviously you've seen New York change over time since you've been there, but has there been a particular decade that was your favorite to work in?
That's a good question. I turn 65 next Sunday. Wait, that's in 2 days? That's a good question. People have asked me that. I have to say every decade has been wonderful. With challenges. I've known deep sorrow, deep sadness, and great happiness, and everything in between. So, and when you study the lives of someone like Man Ray in Paris, he didn't have any heat. He would stay in bed with Lee Miller for a long time, thank goodness. But, that's how they discovered solarization. When you read about Edward Curtis out there on the plains, 20 years, Mr. Morgan commissioned him to do those, I'm sure he was thinking, well, I'd really like to go to New York and, go into a coast. I don't think photographers think about their favorite times. I think they were all great. I think it's the Buber, the German, or the Martin Buber, who did I Am Thou. The traveler is not aware of the journey, where the journey's going to lead him. I think that's great. That's what I would say about my life. I don't know. Just jump in. You just have one, and I'm always happy in the dark rooms and making work. It's my happiest time, I guess. There have been tremendous struggles, though. But, you know, I don't think that's unusual for artists. When you look at Pollock, he's an example. You know, his paintings, those great paintings, were just when he was out at the Springs, maybe 5 years. And he had struggles, and Diane Arbus, and, you know, Francesca Woodman. I mean, I think they all... I like, really want to live long, but, you know, who knows? I don't know. I mean, the history of photography, I think if one of my students said to me, oh, I don't know if I would do, I'm like, you know, it's too much work. I'm like, you know, I can see Edward Curtis out there. Well, if I don't have a one-person show at the Met, I'm not going to go 1 foot further. You know, I don't think the history of photography would be empty without any pictures if we all gave up. That's what's so great about it. It's all about light. It's all about chemistry. It's an invention. It's an innovation. But Dr. Edwin Land, I mean, what a great invention that is, you know? Changed my life, and it's a game changer for, I think, everybody in the room. It's a precursor to the iPhone and Stephen Jobs. I believe that was his biggest hero was Dr. Edwin Land. I think that's well documented. So, I mean, visual thinking is, I think visually. That's why I saw the Man Ray right away. I could see that signature right there. It was, I think, how could you not see that signature? But I'm visually very sensitive, so, or have visual intelligence. We have all different kinds of intelligences. So, but I did have a lot of fun in New York. It was really great. I don't know how, Will and I were talking about it. It's like, how did I survive? I have no idea. I think I had a guardian angel all around me. You know, I lived in Little Italy with mafia over there. John, what's his name, the grandfather, and, you know, the mafia and the drugs and homeless people. I mean, it was wild. But, you know, it kept you on your toes, I got to say that. You weren't but it was a rich experience. But now I'm in a different, you know, I like to look at a tree, the sunset. I'm a little courtier that way. I'm probably Hallmark cars, you know, this way. But, you know. But I think it's great. I mean, the world is a beautiful place. And if you're a photographer, I think it's, you know, or an artist, I mean, we need, especially now. I mean, I feel like we're going a little bit on the crazy side over here. You know, let's calm down. Go look at some art. And when I was young and I didn't have any money, really, I thought I made $5,000 my first year in New York. I made $3,000. So, ouch. My apartment was $300 a month. Ouch. People were kind to me, you know. So I just do that with other artists. I do that with my students and, you know. So it's all been exhilarating. I'm sure you all had those moments, total exhilaration, nirvana, and then all of a sudden, whoa, you know, so. Are there any other questions? Well, thank you so much for tonight. Thank you for listening to me.